Hello and welcome to What's on Your Screen, a podcast all about the entirely different online worlds we each encounter. For example, during my recent trip to Florida, I saw a billboard by the interstate that was advertising the website geoengineeringwatch.org, which was a portal into a side of the internet that was completely foreign to me. It had articles about artificially generated snowstorms and the dangers of square clouds, and an approach to both graphic and web design that I've not seen since about 2009. But we're not here to talk about conspiracy theorists, and we're not here to talk about delightful Instagram reels of grey-haired ladies singing Crazy Frog on their local pub's karaoke machine. But we are here to talk about something else that can be spotted by the side of a big road. I mean, like the billboard in Florida, that was by a big road, not Crazy Frog karaoke. That's not by a big road. Although it would improve the average service station experience. For me, at least. You always know that you're almost back in Nottingham when you see the 8 great cones of concrete that stand at Ratcliffe-on-Soar. Visible from the M1, they pretty much have their own train station and are only a couple of miles from the airport. These cooling towers at Britain's last operating coal-fired power station have become a landmark imbued with that comforting, nostalgia-tinged sensation of nearly being home. So it was big news when the power station was finally turned off for the last time in September last year, and everyone was keen to hear what would happen to the cooling towers. Perhaps they'd stay as a monument to the region's industrial past. Perhaps they'd be repurposed in some ingenious way. No. Nottinghamshire Live, the online side of our local paper, posted a headline a week later: Power station demolition update as explosions take place. Then it all went quiet for a bit, with only the occasional update over the following months, like officials at East Midlands Airport will help pick the right time for the cooling towers to be demolished, until August of this year, when we suddenly got cooling towers to be demolished as explosions timeline confirmed, and a mere day later, amazing footage shows power station's cooling towers demolished. And like that, they were gone. And the footage is amazing. Simultaneously, all 8 towers begin to collapse down and in on themselves, folding as if they are wet vases whose clay has been stretched too thin on a potter's wheel. A cone of dust remains for a moment, like a lingering ghost. Within seconds, nothing but rubble remains, and the skyline of the last 50 years has been wiped away. And then we got another headline from Nottinghamshire Live. Crowds gather for power station demolition in the wrong place. The crowds had gathered to see the demolition of 8 cooling towers at a decommissioned Nottinghamshire power station. The time publicised for the demolition of all 8 towers was 11 a.m. on Thursday, August 14th. Yet in what is perhaps the ultimate example of the consequences of not reading a news article properly, the crowds gathered at Trent Lock on Thursday were watching the wrong power station. In a moment reminiscent of the scene in Only Fools and Horses where Del Boy and family removed the wrong chandelier, the power station demolition they were there to see was happening around 50 miles away. So, of course, that seemed like a pretty telling example of our modern relationship with online news. Although I wouldn't be surprised if Nottinghamshire Live had known that an ambiguous headline about cooling towers being demolished would get more attention than if they'd specified that they were talking about the cooling towers that no one cares about. And perhaps, if they hadn't been so ambiguous, people wouldn't have turned up to see the wrong towers be demolished. And then I scrolled down to the comments section, where various people were claiming that the images of folks supposedly gathered in the wrong place were actually just people out enjoying the sunshine, which would be a pretty telling example of the relationship that online news has with facts, clicks, and the attention economy. I wanted to know what the local journalism ecosystem looks like from the inside in our current era of the internet. The names of venerable old local papers still sit as recognisable landmarks in our browser's address bars. NottinghamPost.com, LeicesterMercury.co.uk, BirminghamMail.co.uk. But when you open each of these pages, you see the names Nottinghamshire Live, Leicestershire Live, and Birmingham Live, each with similar branding but in different colours. And that's because those three titles, along with 104 other regional papers, are all owned by one company, Reach plc.
Reach is one of the companies that owns a lot of the local media in the UK. So it's Reach plc, and it used to be known as Trinity Mirror, which is probably a name a lot more people recognise and it's a lot more established because its association with the Daily Mirror newspaper. Basically, they rebranded to Reach. I think it was probably around the time they got involved in, were found to be involved in the huge phone hacking scandal. To be honest, that probably was one of the reasons behind the rebrand. I don't know for certain, but it's just it seems conveniently timed.
They also own national papers like the Daily Express, the Star, the Sunday Mail, and a load of other websites and magazines. In their words, they own over 120 print and online brands. And they're one of the three big companies that own 90% of the UK's regional papers. Corey has worked as a journalist for both the Grimsby Telegraph and the Leicester Mercury, both of which are Reach-owned titles with online counterparts.
So you were expected, all sides really, I think you were expected about, I think it was 3 to 5 stories a day as a journalist. And that's, submitted, approved, like by the editors, looked over, edited, and either published or scheduled for tomorrow. And that was, every single day. So you'll be looking at potentially 25 stories a week. You're thinking at least 6,000, 7,000 words, I'd say, a week on local news. And that's dependent. That's regardless of how busy your patch is as well. And if you were given a patch, and it's not that, like I say, not that the Grimsby Telegraph necessarily put out like bad stories. Like some of it was very, very good because it was still journalists that have been trained and qualified. And Hannah Corkin, who is the editor there, I still hold her as a really high regard as an editor. She's a very, very talented news gatherer. And it's just, it's beyond the kind of the what people would say would be like the traditional editor in a newspaper that, that the changes are being made that you would see today.
So with the paper, like that makes sense. You've
Yeah.
got to fill it.
Yeah.
Because the paper just runs on advertising.
Yeah.
If there's not paper there, there's nowhere to advertise, there's no money.
Yeah.
But what does that look like online? Because there's not something you need to pad out.
No.
So what are the pressures there?
So for online, it's a completely different beast, really. Yeah, because and you've got to realize in the context of all this, like they do so much for online clicks and do so much for ad revenue, but it's a fraction of what it is from the income, in print media. So like it's so kind of twisted and ironic that they spend so much time trying to get people on the website that, in the print media is dying a much more advanced rate because it's being neglected. But it's still the newspaper that's bringing in, 50 to 75% of the income for the.
I did not realise
that. It was definitely at Grimsby, but a lot of sites, it was pretty much spread throughout like a solid,
Is that from paying for the paper?
Yeah, it's
or
a
is it
mixture
just
of
the
ads. It's a mixture of ads. It's a mixture of people paying for paying for the newspaper outright. Obviously, when cover prices come up, they kind of give it a little bit of a boost. If you put the cover price up, but then people complain and less people buy it. So it's kind of like a give and take, really. You kind of, it's not really something that they can continuously push the button of, because people will just stop buying it altogether. But the issue is obviously the less content in it, the less quality content, the more likely people are going to step away from it anyway. But yeah, and then you go to, I don't know the rates for clicks and things now, but it used to, it was always done by people far, far away from where my role was as a humble journalist, humble local journo. But yeah, you're looking at a fraction of for 1,000 views, maybe you would get a small amount of money for it. I wouldn't even know. I wouldn't say more than £1 for 1,000 views for a local. Clicks are a lot more kind of beneficial as well. So you've got people that aren't necessarily going to be clicking through as well. But if they do, that's extra money and that's extra income. So that's where you get things like referral links and stuff. You start seeing a lot more kind of stories.
Oh, I see.
Stories
You mean clicks through from the newspaper's site to the advertiser's site, and they pay extra per time that happens.
I believe so. Yeah, it's one of those. It's kind of, you're not just seeing the advert, but actively engaging with it always does more for a newspaper. And but it can also go to a next level as well, where you've got affiliate links, where it's affiliate stories. You'll see it at the top. It's like a little bar. Most people probably miss it, but you can always tell which ones it is, and it's usually when they're talking about products. So they're saying, this item, this really, really great air conditioner at such and such place is on sale. Isn't that great? That's so cool. And then that's kind of the story, but they compile it really, really cleverly, because it's along the lines of 10 must-have products for when you are trying to beat the heat. They do it like that, and then they say, "Oh, you know what? That's a great idea. Let's buy that. Let's click the link, see how much it costs. It's still in stock. See if I can get it delivered." That's some money for the paper. That's right. So it's.
And were you writing those kind of articles? Are journalists writing those?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
How did you feel writing those? Because you've signed up to be a journalist doing the vital work of covering local stories, and then being asked to write something that's masquerading as an article, but it's actually advertising. How's that feel for you?
Yeah, it's not great, really. Especially when you put it into that context, you don't think you don't go through journalism. You don't go through learning journalism, studying journalism at university, working towards this career to then become someone writing glorified ads for a website. And people don't really like that content that much. Like, just even if they're getting linked through to a story, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, we've got one person clicking a link off that, you might be putting 10 people off the news going forward, because it's just a load of adverts. And if that's what they're putting on social media as well, that's just gonna turn that kind of that it's going to transfer negatively into the algorithm and stuff that these websites work on. Every single one of these schemes is putting the onus on a third party to try and get their audience back, and that's the worst part. That's not sustainable in any kind of form of long term. It's the journalism that I wanted to take a part of died in 2011, I think. It was when clickbait and the internet and social media took the stage, and it was an era of journalism that I didn't want to be a part of, but kind of hoped it wasn't going to be that, and it ended up being that, and much, much worse. So, yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that Corey's no longer a journalist.
2023 was a really difficult year for Reach PLC. They had just countless redundancies that were made. I think over 1,000 journalists lost their jobs at the company in that period, and it was over the course of about, I think it was 4 periods of redundancies in the end, and 3 out of those 4 included my job being at risk. And I said goodbye to a lot of people that I worked with. Some of them had been there for at least like 5-10 years, possibly longer. Some of them had been there since print media was very popular. So it had been a very long time, and it just got to a point where for me it was just too much. It was the third time a job was at risk. I was like one of 6 reporters, and they were cutting it down to 4, and I felt like I was, one of the more highly risked ones. So I just felt like I needed to just step away. Just because I wasn't going to find out until after Christmas at that point as well. This was November 2023, and a lot had happened in my life at that point as well. So it was very much I was dealing with a lot of personal issues and family issues. And then on top of that, they were like, by the way, your job's at risk again, and you won't find out till New Year. And I was just kind of like, I can't deal with that. I can't go through Christmas with my family spending money I might not have on presents, and just getting to the other side and being like, oh yeah, by the way, you've lost your job. Bye. Here's sayonara. Here's some money. Don't talk shit about us. So I took the voluntary decision, the voluntary redundancy, and it was so much better. Because I'd have had to have worked through Christmas as well, which is a particularly grueling period for local journalism and just journalism generally. The reasons why I joined local journalism and just journalism generally, I don't think my kind of beliefs and my drive, my kind of ethos, I guess, matched that of local journalism anymore.
For you as an individual, during all these changes, stuff like stats and click numbers, how directly were you exposed to that? Did you have quotas that involved that? Were you kind of metaphorically beaten over the head about those kind of things?
Yes and no. Like for stats, definitely. Like they use, well, all sorts of different companies use different stat monitoring devices. They might have their own internal one. There's one that Reach used in particular called Chartbeat. It took the figures from all of the stories listed on the website and broke it down into statistics. So it would say, so it would be live statistics as well. It wouldn't just be, oh, okay, yesterday this many people clicked on the story. Like it did do that. That was part of its job. But the main thing that everyone used it for was the live update feed. And you would see, the best feeling as a journalist was putting a story up and then just seeing it skyrocket to the top of the story list and just saying, yeah, everyone, that's, it is hot shit. People are reading this story right now. But it could also humble you as well. You might say, yeah, it's the top of the story. It's, it's top of the list. It's got, 25,000 views, but it also tells you how long people are on the page for, which could be anything from 10 seconds to 1 minute 30, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, depending on the length of the story, but also how engaging it is. And that's the way that it showed, like the clicks is one thing, but the longer that people stay on the page is also monitored. And that's something that can be, not only shows that a story is like, engagement worthy, but also sustains as well. So it shows your people are staying on the website.
The two stats being the clicks and the amount of time people spent on there. So I suppose, were you aiming for a balance of the two? What was prioritized there?
Yeah, it was more of a balance, I think. I think, they weren't going to turn around and bite your head off if you had a solid, like, if you had like 500,000 views in a week and like they were all on your stories for 30 seconds, like they weren't going to care that much because that's, they've got a few lines in, they've given up. That's usually how long a person stays on a website, which is quite interesting. They, on a news story anyways, they take in the headline, they take in the picture, they take in the first few sentences, get a general gist, maybe scroll down, see what the kind of conclusion is, and that's it. That's enough news consumed for that one story. But yeah, so as long as you were kind of, the clicks were the kind of big hitters, but they did like to acknowledge that, if you were on a story for a long time, it was clearly, it might not have done fantastic numbers. You might have got, maybe five figures, but you didn't get, but you were on, people like everyone, the average reading time was 2 minutes 30. That's pretty good. That's a good, you can't turn that down. That's still a good acknowledgement. So yeah, and you've got to realize that obviously not every story is for everyone. So it's you've got to it's that kind of judging the returns and judging what people like and engage with the most.
So what was your really hot shit story? What's the one that raced up the leaderboards and you remember being really pleased with?
Yeah, no, there is one that really comes to mind, and it was, I think it was at Leicester, the Leicester Mercury, and it was a story about a girl being sent home from school, because of course it was, and it was about uniform, of course it was, and it was specifically the fact that they'd been away for, I think, over summer, I think it was, and they'd come back to school, and the skirt was officially too short compared to what she did last year, and her mum spoke to me about it. She was raging. Her mum was like, "This is ridiculous. This is, outrageous. What's she supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? Buy a new skirt? Ridiculous." And she was just saying, she basically put it down to the fact that her daughter has like big hips, or like wide hips, I think is what she said. And basically said her daughter had a big ass, and that's why the skirt was too short. She had a bigger ass than other people that were same waist size, so it meant the skirt was smaller. And yeah, and we got the classic pictures. Well, obviously, thank God, I'm so glad that we didn't get the girl in the photo. I was like, I always used to kind of do a little underhanded judgment on that kind of side. I'd be like, that's something. No, we can't do that. Like, I refuse to even acknowledge the idea. I'll just say the kid didn't want to do it. Because
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because formulating in my head then was how am I going to ask this question of you?
Yeah.
Is it kind of the GCSE results day A level thing where definitely media organisations get pictures of good looking young women, girls, and it's very thinly veiled that is what they are hoping people will click on.
Yeah.
And that is so grim.
When it comes to that, I've done GCSE and A-level results days, and I never even thought to lead with that. And I'm hoping no one else did that for me and made me look weird. And the current thinking about it, you're making me concerned now. But yeah, no, it was one of those things. Yeah, like I refused to, we used to have to be so strict with having kids in your stories anyways. So you didn't think, you would have to get parental permission is an absolute minimum. But if you felt the kid didn't want to be involved, if you felt like the kid was just too vulnerable or was taking advantage, or if it was going to directly impact them, then you just, you kind of took a step back and you were like, no, we've got to kind of leave it.
But with this one, clearly, it was a good story.
Yeah.
Why do you think it got so many clicks?
Yeah, I think it's really funny because a lot of the times uniform stories do really well, and I think it's just partially because parents want to see if it's their kid's school. And if it is their kid's school, it gets shared in the WhatsApp groups for all the kids' parents, and then that leads to even more clicks. But then it's also, does she have friends? Is she getting is the girl's friends clicking it? Are the girl's friends' parents clicking it? I think that's a big part of it. But then you've got the outsiders, I guess, the people that don't follow don't know the person, don't know the school, but they just think the story's so ridiculous and so outrageous that they have to click, they have to read, they have to see what the hell's going on. Because There's just something that entices them to it. And a lot of times people just take the piss. People just laugh at people that do stories like that. And you know it. You know that. And it's but they persevere. And it's not even a case of like, you're turning around and actively saying, yeah, no, talk to us about it. No, they won't make fun of you. They were silly. No, you're actively be like, you are putting this out here and you are letting, this is a story. We just want to check you are comfortable doing this story about your kid. We are comfortable putting this story out. And they'll be like, yeah, fine. Absolutely. Because I think some people maybe just like getting in the paper. I don't know if it's a status thing. I don't know if it's a funny anecdote thing, or maybe, but there's also the side of it that a lot of local papers do get stuff done too. Like, they do campaigns, they get things overturned, they get things, maybe every single parent is just going into it thinking this will overturn the authoritarian uniform constraints that my child has exposed to, which it never does, because schools are reluctantly stubborn for that kind of thing at the best of times, even without the paper getting involved. So yeah, I don't know, but the engagement was insane, and you got to think maybe if for Leicestershire Live, you would think, if it was a good story, it would get at least 10,000 clicks. If it was a very good story, it'd get at least 50,000 clicks. It was an amazing story, it'd get 10,000 clicks. No, 10,000, 100,000 clicks, I should say. And this story got 2.5 million clicks.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. 2.5 million people read that story. And that was just on the one website. Like, let's say it's Leicestershire Live. It was on the one website for Leicestershire Live. That was the 2.5 million. That's not mentioning the fact it got picked up by other regional sites. So you got picked up by the Birmingham Mail, Coventry Telegraph. It got picked up by Nottingham Live, Nottinghamshire Live, Manchester Evening News. Places that it's nowhere near.
When you say picked up, yeah, like, so what?
They get your story
on their website that's about their area. They're going to say, "Oh, in Leicester, this happened."
Yeah, absolutely. That's what they do. It's
Is it just because you're in a network?
Yeah, that's partially
That's also our paper, so it'll get us loads more clicks.
Yeah, that's exactly how that works. That's so they would turn around and say, "Look, we've got this amount of, we've got this story that's really popping off on social media. If you pick this up, you put it out there, people will click on this. People will complain. There'll be 100, 200 people being like, this isn't Manchester. What the hell? But people say that about the stories set in Manchester. They just think they've got differing views on where Manchester begins and ends. So they don't care. What they do care about, though, is the fact that a website that might get 500, 600,000 clicks, maybe a day. It's maybe on a very good day, over 1 million clicks. One story got 2.5 over the course of maybe 2 days in total. That's enough for them to shake their heads and go, yeah, no, we're taking this story as well. And the further away it gets, the more outlandish it is. But yeah, but that's how it works. The more they want to see their individual newspaper going up the click scale. I guess they want to see going up the amount of engagement, because there would be leaderboards and things like that. You would see you could filter it in a way that showed you which newspapers had the most people on their sites, and that
of ones in
reach. Yeah, everyone that was on the system would get filtered into a tier list, a league almost, really, of an updated live feed of which one's got the most people on it. And usually, this is an organization that dealt with nationals as well. So if you included all of them on it, the nationals were obviously over 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 people on it at one time. But then you filter it down and you make it regional only. You see that national numbers on a regional paper, it's going to get you noticed. And that was probably one of my only stories that did that, but it just, I'm kind of almost glad it did, because it almost feels, I feel bad for the kid, I guess, looking back, because it's the kid didn't ask for that. But it was the mum. Like the mum really persevered with it as well. It wasn't like a thing of like we were trying to coerce the mum into it and being like, "Oh, come on, do it. It'll be funny. Do it. Go on." It was a case of we would tell them this is a story that's going to probably get a lot of traction. The uniform stories usually do. Is your daughter okay with you talking about this? If so, do you want her to be named? Do you want her to be full named? Do you want to just say it's your daughter and don't necessarily specify which? You might have 2 daughters, you might have 5. It doesn't that level of anonymity. And I think that might have been the level that we went with. But either way, in the local area, people know that, she was probably called Big Arse Girl for like 5 years after that in school, bless her. And it's, yeah.
That wasn't the headline you went with, was
No,
it?
Big Arse Girl sent home from school, bad skirt. So I don't write the headlines anymore. No, it was something outlandish. It was, I'm going to have to load it up because this has really piqued my interest now. I'm just horrified to find out that apparently we did include the name of the girl, which, yeah, but apparently, it must have been. I'm going to have to send it to you because you will. This is the Mirror as well. This wasn't even Leicestershire Live. It was Leicestershire Live as well, but this was the Mirror. It got picked up on. But amazing photograph, to be fair, because thankfully, like I say, we didn't get the girl in it, but it's the dad holding up some skirts and looking really concerned at the skirts, but kind of not, also looking off into the distance.
Yeah, it's a classic. Further down where he's kind of glaring at the camera, it's a classic angry people in local newspapers photo.
The parents were fine with the girl being named. I don't even, because if they turn around and say, yeah, name her. Like, we're not going to say, "Oh, well, are you being bad parents?" Like, that's you're going to kind of go with it because it's like, if they turn around, the editor finds out or someone higher up finds out that you had the chance of naming her and you didn't. I wouldn't. They'd probably get some kind of comment at the very least about it being like, yeah, why didn't you get the name if you obviously they said you could name them? Like, it'd be withholding information and it'd be. You as a journalist, you kind of do and don't have that call to make, I suppose. It's if it was going to be something that was particularly damning, then you would have that call. But otherwise, if it's something that's nothing really to do with you, it's the parents want them named and it included, you're not in a position to kind of start then judging it from there. That's the editor's call from there, to kind of make that decision.
With this stuff, with the leaderboards and the learning what gets clicks, what gets time spent on the page, did that change the way that you write and report these stories?
I'm not going to outright say no, because I honestly believe, yeah, it probably would be. Whether it was necessarily a conscious decision might depend, I suppose, because if you wrote it in a way that you thought was the best way to write it, that would still be subject to further editing from usually it could be the editor, but it could be there was a team of content editors as well, specifically that kind of like the sub editor role, but for online news. I don't know if I think there was some things I would necessarily I probably picked some stuff up and wrote stories, maybe the content of the story itself I wouldn't have imagined myself writing, but ended up writing because it was something that was going to do well on local news. So the one example was that a story absolutely erupted because a parish council cut down a really old hedge in their parish, and it was to install a gate to let people in to the park on another end. But they were like, no, we won't need to cut down the hedges. It's fine. And then they cut down one of the hedges, and obviously they were fuming. Spelt Fewin, Min, I should say, fuming. Because a new level of rage that I've yet to see replicated. Because I went to the parish council meeting that happened literally days after this decision happened, and it was rammed, and it was so full, literally rammed. And as soon as I said, I'm with the press, I'm with the local paper, they were like, let him in. He needs to tell the story. He needs to cover this prejudice, this just injustice that happened. And and I got front seat to the most iconic, non-recorded parish council shit show. That I shouldn't be there to cover that story. That's insane. It's such an but it's one of those things where you were sent to it and you're like, and I got paid overtime. I was out of hours when I did it. I got, expense to go out to the middle of nowhere and come back again, and cover this parish council meeting because it was going to be insane. And it was insane. And because of that, everyone loved it and they clicked on the story and thousands of people read it.
Final question then. What would it take for you to go back to being an online journalist?
Yeah, that's I would say immediate one, kind of short answer, a lot would have to change. You would have to look at it would have to be probably a news organization that I would want to get behind. I would have to feel passionate about, to work with it, to work with them. They'd have to, have good morals, ethos. They would want to have the community at heart. And to this day, a lot of newspapers still do. Like Nottingham Post are still, very dedicated to local news at times. And I still rate it, and Natalie, the editor there, does a really great job at times, and she holds people account. Like they're having a big bust up with Reform UK at the moment, where they've literally been banned from covering the county council, which is outrageous. Like, because that's an outright, authoritarian level move to make, and it's just a dangerous thing. But at the same time, you can't build your credibility doing amazing things like that and really representing the people, and then sully your coverage with really, really engagement baity stories and difficult issues. Covering the difficult issues lightheartedly or just being a bit tone deaf at times as well. It's just there needs to be a fundamental change in the industry as a whole, I think, and that kind of starts at the top. It's not something individual journalists can just fight the power and do, because they'll just get made redundant. They'll just get fired. That's it's one of those things that, under 10 grand, you can get rid of most journalists in newspapers because they've not been there long enough. It's not a thing that can just be so easily changed by a few people standing up and saying no. But newspapers aren't run by the people that want to put on good news. They're run by people that want to make a lot of money. And that's when you get issues like phone hacking scandals. And that's where you get issues like, any kind of number of clickbaity things happening and problematic headlines and stories that go in the favor of their friends, the also mighty and powerful and rich. So it'd have to be either a site that would be locally ran by good people with good intentions, and you do have that with some places. There's a fantastic one that just kind of escapes me at the moment, but there's a lot of like hyper local. The Manchester Mill, and they've been self-publishing. It's been a few years now, but they've been self-publishing stories. They've been, they've got a build-up of journalists. They've got really fantastic people involved that just tell the story of people about Manchester. It's not, but people subscribe to it. That's the thing. It's a payment subscription model. Like, you do it for your films, you do it for your music. Why can't you do it for your news? You can't turn around and say, where's this great news at? Why can't you do this? And then not put your money where your mouth is. Like, that's kind of, if you want good news, then it's probably something that has to be a premium. But like, going back to it, yeah, it'd take a lot. It'd have to be a specific spot. It would have to be like the Manchester Mill. It'd have to be that kind of hyper-local journalism that represents an ethos that I have, covers good stories, important stories, and is backed by a community and is supported by engages and works with the community, and it doesn't exploit the community. That's probably what would have to take me back. And those jobs are few and far between. It's not a particularly profitable industry either, which doesn't help. Like, in regards to just journalists generally, like, I made I made a lot more money doing freelance stuff that supplemented my wage in local journalism. I used to write for OK magazine for all the clickbaity stuff there, but at the same time, you get a week's pay in a day kind of thing. If you did 2 shifts, you get a week's pay with 2 shifts. on top of your, what you were working that week. So it's just it make it too hard for local journalism to thrive, because they look at it from the perspective of a business and not as the perspective of a newspaper.
Thanks again to Corey Bedford. If you have a look at the show notes, you'll find links to a statement he gave to the industry site Hold the Front Page when he left Reach, and you'll also find a link to the stories about the school skirt and the controversial hedge removal. As Corey mentioned, the Nottingham Post and Nottinghamshire Live are currently in a battle with the leader of Nottinghamshire County Council, Mick Barton from Reform UK. He's instructed all 40 of his fellow county councillors not to give interviews or send press releases to Nottinghamshire Live. This podcast episode may not have painted a particularly glowing portrait of local journalism, but that does not make this okay. No matter what your views are on either Reach plc or Reform UK, that's just not how democracy works, and we as a society should not stand for it. You can read more about the situation in the show notes. On a lighter note, if you're interested in the analytics tools being used by newspapers' websites, I was surprised to hear them mentioned on the latest episode of The Rest is Entertainment. They hardly need me to be promoting them, but it was a funny coincidence to hear that on the same day that I was editing this interview. So I've put a link to that in the show notes too, and I'm sure they'll reciprocate with a shout out on their show. I'm always interested to hear about what's on your screen, so if you want to share an email or voice note about the peculiar things invading your algorithm, or about your favourite local news story, all the details on how to do that are also in the show notes. Thanks, see you next time.
Yes.